And here you see the nickel bag of heroin. Glassine bag, little envelope, much like the type of envelope that stamp collectors use. And it contains 90 milligrams of a white powder. A percentage of that white powder is the highly addictive heroin. This is the $5 or the nickel bag. The $5 bag in New York City sells for $10 on the streets of Boston. The same nickel bag sells for $20 on the streets of Providence. So it shows that if you do have a heroin habit in places like Providence or Boston, and you need your substance 3 or 4 times a day, you've got a very, very expensive habit. Now, there was a dramatization that you saw at the outset of the program here today, and it showed a young fellow shooting up, turning on, taking off. And he was utilizing the tools of the trade of the individual who abuses drugs by injection, the speed freak or the heroin addict. And here are the tools of the trade of these people. The eyedropper and the needle, the cooker. The drug is poured into the cooker and brought to solution, taken up into the needle and fired into the veins, shot into the veins in the arms, the hands, or the legs. What frequently happens after repeated administration of the drug this way, after sticking needles in the same veins for a continuing period of time, tracks are formed, or what we call tracks. Now you see on your screen the arms of a drug addict, and you see purple lines go running up and down his arm. These are what we call tracks. They're caused by collapsed veins, and they look like someone has run an indelible pencil up and down his arm along the veins. Well, this is a very brief highlighting of some of the different problems that we have with different substances. But the drug problem today is a very complicated and a very complex one, and it cannot be adequately covered in 30 short minutes. But I do hope that the discussion here today has stimulated in your minds many questions, and I do hope that you will go to the telephones and call them into our panel. Thank you very much.
Police officers who would like to ask questions of our panel are requested to call area code 617-491-5600, collect if necessary. The guests on today's program are Dr. David Meyerson, a psychiatrist and clinical director of the Drug Addiction Rehabilitation Center at Boston State Hospital. Captain Joseph Jordan of the Vice and Narcotics Unit of the Boston Police Department, and Richard Callahan, Regional Director of the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs. The moderator is James P. Kelly, Executive Producer of the Law Enforcement Training Project.
We have a question here from one of our listeners. Why is marijuana, which is an exhilarant or hallucinogen, listed as a narcotic? I'll direct this question to you, Dick.
Well, it's a game of words, really. There are 2 definitions of marijuana. There's a medical or a scientific definition, which classifies it pharmacologically as a hallucinogenic drug, and then there's the legal definition. And the legal definition spells out what substances are illegal, and it signifies the felony drugs by calling them narcotics. Other drugs fall into the same legal area that causes so much confusion. Cocaine is classified, legally speaking, as a narcotic drug, but it's not a down, it's not a depressant, it's a stimulant drug. But it's just a game of words, really. It depends what definition you're using. If you're using a legal definition, there are a different range of drugs. If you're using the scientific or the pharmacological definition, the marijuana falls in the hallucinogenic group.
Thank you, Dick. Dr. Meyerson, you have this rehabilitation clinic at Boston State Hospital. From a medical standpoint, what percentage would you say of the people who come to you or who are sent to you for rehabilitation for drug addiction have been at one time involved with marijuana? Is there a correlation, for example, between marijuana users and those who later turn on with stronger drugs such as heroin?
I don't think you can answer the question that way. I think what we've noted is that the use of marijuana and the dangerous use of marijuana differs in different social classes and social groups, and in some of these groups it becomes they do, as the federal people have noted, switch from marijuana to heroin. But in other groups, we have noted, especially among the newer, younger white groups, that they do not necessarily start off with marijuana. They may indeed start off with what is thought to have been a harmless cough preparation, and then gone on to the Robitussin, any of the codeine cough preparations, which should be included in discussion because that can be dangerous.
It sure can. As a matter of fact, I've seen people bombed out of their skulls with that preparation, and I think most druggists are now aware of it. I know that more perceptive police, particularly in some of the smaller communities and towns, are in contact with their druggists for that reason, to try and find out, which of the young children or young people in the town have been the consistent purchasers of this preparation.
In many
find that
communities,
true?
Well, I think when the legislature, this became such a tremendous problem, as Dr. Myerson well knows, that the legislature did pass a law last year requiring that these young people under 21 years of age have a prescription for these exempt narcotic drugs, especially the cough medicine. So it did become such an acute problem that they did pass special legislation to sort of help the situation.
Captain, there's another question that has come in here. I'll direct this to you, in that it involves not only drugs, but also, I think, the question of search and seizure or permission. What can a police officer do in the case of a pupil in school whose drug use is known or suspected? For example, can the school give the police permission to search the pupil's desk or locker?
Well, here again, we get into a pretty gray area. Some schools, when the student enlists or when he signs up, gives the school permission to perform certain duties, such as examining a room or a dormitory and so forth. Now, whether or not that would really involve a search of a room, we've had several cases, by the way, that did originate on this plane where a house mother or a person in charge of a dormitory or a house connected with a college would conduct a search of the room and find the drug, and then would enter the picture. And in many cases, the court has upheld that particular investigation, and in almost as many cases, they've thrown it out on that basis.
I'll tag you with another one now, Captain, while you're hot on the mic here. How can a police officer who has arrested a drug user who is, quote, on the nod, unquote, or someone who's not with it, how can he advise him of his constitutional rights?
Well, again, it would be the degree. How bad is he? I'm sure that we've all seen them that are on the nod, and most of them are very well aware of what's going on in their environment. Whether they're sitting in a chair and appear to be asleep, I won't say they're very alert, but
2
they
feet above it.
they know what's going on in terms of warning them of their rights and so forth.
Inspector Rowe from the Dover, New Hampshire Police Department asked for a definition of STP. It sounds like a gasoline additive. Doctor, would you...
I don't know what the chemistry is. I think
Do you,
Mr. Callahan might know.
Dick,
But
do you have
it's
that?
classified as a hallucinogen, a very potent one indeed.
Right, STP is a drug that was an experimental substance in a major chemical house, and the chemical formula was stolen, and it was sold to the underground chemists who started to put it out. The true chemical symbols, I'm quite sure, are DOM, and it's a very lengthy chemical name, which, if I rattled off, Joe wouldn't believe me. But the initials STP were just arbitrarily given to it, and it is a far less potent hallucinogenic substance, a microgram for microgram, than is LSD, but it is a very dangerous substance, and it is now under federal control, and it's illegal in this country.
After the program, when we're having the cookies and coffee, you can rattle it off for him. we don't use cubes of sugar here. Dr. Meyerson, in this drug rehabilitation center that you direct at Boston State Hospital, what would you say the greatest number of cases consist of? Are they the hardcore users? Are they the situational or spree users that Mr. Callahan was talking about before? Why do these people come to you?
I think we have 2 or 3 groups that come to my mind in answer to your question. The first group, when we are indeed the hardcore users, the heroin users, use enormous amounts, who are apprehended by the police or the courts, or get in trouble, serious trouble with their families or with themselves, and come in voluntary or non-voluntary for our help, either to get withdrawn or to get rehabilitated, or both. Now, in the past 6-7 months, we have been quite preoccupied with a group of much younger drug takers who are experimenting and using all kinds of drugs, from the hallucinogens to the speed, methadone, to the narcotics, shifting in a diffuse kind of way, taking whatever really is available. And we have found these very young people to be quite sick, constituting a serious medical and social and psychiatric problem. And we're, along with other people, quite concerned about this particular group.
And by extension, I guess you could add a legal problem, since if they're not treated, they will become, a future problem for the police or for the authorities. On that score, what provision is there now in the federal government, for example, Dick? Do they have any option as to commitment as against incarceration for drug addiction?
Well, yes, there's a new program, which we relatively new, the Narcotic Addict Rehabilitation Act of 1966. And we recently held a meeting here in Boston with the people from the National Institute of Mental Health, and Dr. Meyerson was at that meeting. And this is the newest federal program for people who are drug addicts. And it is a more progressive approach, most people feel. And there are provisions whereby people can voluntarily commit themselves to the program, where in lieu of criminal prosecution, they can be admitted to the program, or whereby relatives or next of kin can, by petitioning the courts, have people who are addicts put into the program. And the difference in the new program, I think, is the first phase is a clinical type of treatment, such as at Lexington, Kentucky, for a X number of months or years. And after that, there are provisions for aftercare in the home environment, in the home community, and the NIMH will select counselors in the home area, and they will act more or less like probation, but they'll have very, very few number of addicts that they'll be working with, not 100 or 150.
Captain Jordan, does this extend to the city, too? Because you must have these problems where parents or next of kin, so to speak, come in and ask you before it reaches a, police problem in the form of an arrest.
Well, that's why I say thank God for Dr. Meyerson's rehabilitation clinic, because...
you do have an option now.
Oh, yeah, in many cases we refer them right out there, and we're also utilizing the services of the federal government. In terms, I think Mr. Callahan was very thoughtful in arranging one of our young addicts to go down there to Lexington under the federal program. So I hope between the two of them that eventually we'll come up with some sort of an answer with this.
They used to have an expression for that. They'd call it bluegrassing them when they'd send them down to Kentucky, to Lexington. Incidentally, Dick, on the program, and I want to compliment you again on a very excellent lecture. I think it's the first time I've seen pot in a pot. I don't know how you manage that. We have a question from Albert Neal, auxiliary patrolman in Fitchburg, Massachusetts, who wants to know what is the best way to determine from outward appearances whether a person is on a trip with LSD. In other words, what would be the external?
Well, LSD is a very unpredictable substance. There are a few basic things which do generally occur. There's a flushing, there's a trembling, there's a dilation of the pupils. but it's such a very volatile substance that it affects different people in different ways. Some people have good trips, some people have bad trips, some people jump out the window. But I think that if there's an individual who is having an LSD experience, that it's fairly apparent that they are undergoing some type of a real violent chemical reaction. But there's no A plus B equals C type of circumstances that occur with LSD.
Doctor, have you had experience with that?
Yeah. In our experience, we're limited to those who have a bad trip, of course. The people with a good trip wouldn't seek us out. And when they're in a bad trip, it's characterized by a very frightening and bizarre experience. That's a psychosis with hallucinations, and sometimes the hallucinations are acted out by the person. I think there was quite a extraordinarily fine dramatization of the problem on one of the television shows recently of a young girl who took Neighbors Next Door, I think it was called, who took an LSD trip, and it constituted an illness that in many ways has to be treated in medical and psychiatric circumstances.
But going along with that question, Doctor, most of the individuals, at least the ones that I've come in contact with, when they ingest LSD, they become completely disorientated for the period of length of time they're under the influence of the drug.
Yes, but there are different degrees of disorientation. I think
I suppose it would
some
depend
people
on the
are
dose.
well organized enough to handle their feelings of being disoriented and enjoy them.
I imagine there's a tolerance factor at work there. So we have a question from the audience from Gene Burrell. Gene?
Yes, I would like to address my question to Captain Jordan of the Boston Police Department. In the case in Boston, if a man was seen operating erratically in an automobile and the police stopped him and did feel that he was under the influence of narcotic drugs and he was brought to the station house, while being booked and he is told of the charge, if he said that he felt he was not under the influence of drugs and requested to have his own doctor come there and make a test, would this be permitted? And if it is permitted, would the police then counteract with the police doctor to verify the findings of the person's own physician?
Well, again, I would assume that this would be possible. In other words, if a person was charged with operating a vehicle under the influence of a narcotic drug, I think it would be incumbent upon the police to prove that charge. And I think the police would have to, if they, let's say, had no drug and were depending upon a physical observation, which we are not experts, would have to depend upon the medical profession to provide that expertise. Like, I would assume a physician would be called. It may be a police doctor, the police would call, and the defendant, I think, would be entitled to call a physician of his choice. So I think it would be permissible under these circumstances to do this. Again, you get two different opinions. You might get an opinion from the police doctor that he is, and you might get an opinion from the other doctor that he isn't. But
incidentally, and that's the subject, isn't one of the problems with the people who raise the argument about the use of alcohol and the use of marijuana, the fact that alcohol is measurable, legally measurable in the individual's blood, whereas with marijuana, even though the active ingredient, THC, is known, it's not measurable at the time?
True. Yeah, well, they get the breathalyzer and so forth.
Fine for the guy who's,
test.
had the booze, but the one who's, been on the pot, it's a little more difficult to tell from, unless you find a roach in the car, or unless you find it in his pocket, or he admits to having smoked
There's the odor present in the car or something. But in the absence of that, I don't think that there is any chemical...
Which I think is one of the strongest obstacles, incidentally, despite all the, comments that we have had on it with the recent case before Judge Toro here. One of the strongest obstacles is the fact that there is no way to measure it, and that the person is a definite menace. He's lost his local mobility in the sense of alcoholism, but not necessarily in the sense of, using marijuana, one of the hallucinogens. Incidentally, Dick, you mentioned before, you referred to some written material, and I'm just wondering if you have material, for example, that those in our television audience or those here in our studio might want to refer to in the field of drug abuse that can be sent to these individuals on request.
Well, yes, we do have quite a variety of 12 or 14 publications, a manual for law enforcement officers. And we also pull together something that I think is very useful to police, what we call a list of chemical precursors. And these are the chemical precursors that you have to have before you can make these hallucinogenic or these psychedelic drugs in an illegal or a clandestine laboratory. They're long, complex names, but it is valuable to have if you go into a place and you find a variety of chemicals and paraphernalia to be able to match them up against a list.
Well, for example, if somebody has a supply of acetic anhydride, you know that he might possibly be trying to take morphine base and make heroin.
Right, and the same with, there are a whole range of chemicals for making DMT and LSD and some of the others.
I think that's how Dr. Jekyll started.
We have movies, we've got 2-week schools, we've got a great number of services, but if they do write to the office, we can give them a complete rundown of what is available.
An address that they can write to.
Yes, it is. It's John F. Kennedy Federal Building, Boston, Mass.
Now, I might add, incidentally, for those of you who are outside the New England area, there is an office, for example, in Washington.
Yes, we have a headquarters in Washington. We have offices in New York, Philadelphia, and we have 17 of them around the world.
If anyone is in doubt as to where to write, they can write to your office here, or they can write to us, and we will forward the letter to the appropriate place. Do we have any more questions from our audience? Captain Kerwin from the Medford Police Department.
I do. I have just one on cocaine. I understand that it affects the central nervous system as a stimulant, and yet is used as a local anesthetic. And I would like to know from any member of the panel who could tell me what medical phenomena is involved here, if any.
I think that sort of points in your direction.
I think you asked the question the only way that it can be answered. It just happens to have these properties of, on the one hand, being a local anesthetic, and a very useful one, and on the other hand, being a central nervous system stimulant. That's just the nature of this curious drug. From what I understand, it's relatively hard to get in Boston. It's hard to get than the other drugs.
It comes from South America, mostly from Peru, doesn't it, Dick?
There's a new trafficking.
Cocaine has grown tremendously in popularity.
The main problem from an enforcement standpoint, incidentally, as far as cocaine is concerned, is that the people who use it generally can't afford it. They're more affluent people, and they're not the type that are likely to give up their source.
That's true.
But I don't. Is this true that if it's used by physicians as a local anesthetic, that supply is never used illegally? It's mostly.
Well, we have encountered some pharmaceutically made cocaine in Boston in the last year, but very, very little.
It's been diverted from legitimate use.
Yes, right.
And probably through theft from a medical, warehouse or something. But they also have other anodynes, I think, which are probably equally potent as painkillers. Procaine, Novocaine, and other substances that can be used. When you find cocaine in the powdered form, it is usually an indication of an illegal source.
Right, and it's very expensive. As you said, it's $20 for a small bag on the streets today.
We have any more questions from our audience? I see a lot of thoughtful faces out there, some of you poring over your manuals. Incidentally, for those of you in our television audience, I remind you again the number here, and also the fact that if you are outside of this area, you may call collect. You just use the area code 617. The number is 491-5600. We have an anonymous question here called in, to what extent is organized crime involved in drug trafficking? I think that has been pretty well explored in both documentary TV, entertainment TV, and most of our media. But maybe using this as a base question, I could ask you, Dick, to what extent is organized crime involved in the new type drugs, say in the hallucinogen, if we could briefly say,
well, it depends on your definition of organized crime. There's an organized criminal element involved. The La Cosa Nostra, the mafia, no, not to any appreciable national extent. Locally, in certain areas, they are involved to some extent, but it's not a part of the international conspiracy, to our knowledge.
I think the fact that it can be made in this country, and they generally tend to get into things that can be smuggled in.
Well, that's true.
Like the
Their
heroin.
involvement in the heroin traffic, they've been getting further and further away from it in recent years. They stay in the
Well,
very
the
high
sentences, I
echelons.
think, have been responsible for that in the federal courts. That's all we have time for today, gentlemen. I want to thank you again, Dr. Myerson, Captain Jordan, and our lecturer, Dick Callahan. And I want to thank you here in the audience who have come into the program today and helped us make it a success.